Nice to see you all. Let's get things underway then. Okay. Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, titled Good Governance: Practical Foundations for Community Energy. Um, yeah, this is being brought to you under our Community Energy Go project. I'm John Taylor, Head of Capacity Building and Strategic Development at Community Energy England. Please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourselves. Be nice and friendly group for today's session. Be nice to hear where you're coming from and what your experience is and what you're hoping to get out of the session today. Um, we're going to be recording it, and we will be emailing the recording and slides around afterwards. So don't feel free like you have to sit through it all, scribbling notes down or taking screenshots. So feel free to relax and engage. If you do not wish to be recorded, please keep your camera and microphone off during the session, and you can use the chat for any questions or comments. Um, so today, we're joined by an excellent speaker, Saskia Huggins. This webinar is part of a series of webinars delivered through a program called Community Energy Go, delivered by ourselves and run by us at Centre for Sustainable Energy and Ashton. Um, Funded by the Energy Redress Fund and other partners like the Net Zero Hubs. You can watch recordings of previous webinars on the Community Energy Go website, which we'll link in the chat. The webinar we ran last month, for example, was all about finance and community shares. So for today, firstly, I'll give an overview of the Community Energy Go program, and we'll then be hearing from Saskia Huggins for about 25 minutes. This will be followed by a Q&A session. If you have questions as we go, do put them in the chat, and then we'll pick them up at the end. I'll kind of lead a Q&A session, unless there are really very urgent clarification points that you want. We'll try and pick those up, and if needed, we'll then wrap up with next steps and a feedback survey at the end, and finishing the session around 2:30 this afternoon. So many of you on the call will be aware of the Community Energy Go program already. Hopefully, you're already receiving some support through it. But for those who aren't, it's a project led by the Centre for Sustainable Energy and delivered with Community Energy England and Ashton. The program supports groups across England to turn their renewable energy idea into reality. It provides you all with expert advice, access to kind of a roster of experienced community energy professionals from across our membership and beyond, and other supportive organisations, as well as practical tools and hands-on support to help you with your community energy projects. Through the programme, we have a network of industry professionals who support groups with tailored support to help groups overcome their barriers. We have a Community Energy Go website where you can read more about the programme. The website also has a section on eligibility criteria to look at, but essentially we support community organisations, not-for-profit groups, and parish or town councils. Most of it with that aim of helping you put in more successful funding applications and with better quality thought through ideas. You don't need to be an incorporated group to get support. That can be part of the process. It's a program specifically to support community-owned renewable energy projects rather than energy efficiency work. So yeah, aiming for those ones which can unlock further funding and investment. If you haven't done so already, you can register your interest for support via the website. We will send a link out for this afterwards, and we can put it into the chat as well. Um, so with that introduction done, I will now hand over to Saskia Huggins, who is an experienced community energy practitioner, founder of Make It Count, and one of our expert associates working on Community Energy Go. So over to you, please, Saskia.
Thank you very much, John. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Governance is a really huge topic, and let's be honest, not one that's always easy to get excited about. So I'm really grateful to you all for turning up today. Um, Most of us will have got involved in community energy because we care about climate action and we want to get projects moving. It's less likely we got involved because we're really passionate about the finer points of, say, voting procedure at an AGM. But it's that kind of behind the scenes work that makes the work we care about possible. It helps us make clear decisions, stay true to our mission, remain accountable to the communities that we're serving, and make sure that the community benefit is not just promised, but protected and delivered. So today, I want to focus on those practical aspects of governance that help community energy groups work well, help us avoid confusion, and helps really critically build that trust that we need with our stakeholders and with our communities. So next slide, please, Faith. So, governance issues often surface at moments of change. It might be you've got a significant new opportunity come up and your group's now needing a more formal legal structure before you can take it on. Might be that a key person's stepping back from the board or somebody new's joining and they're trying to understand how on earth things work. It might be that you're applying for a large grant or entering into a partnership with your local authority for the first time, or just that your group's trying to broaden your support within your community. So all of those scenarios can raise issues around governance. And today I'm going to look at three key areas: the rules and roles that give our work clarity, the safeguards that help us act responsibly, and the culture and practice that shape how things actually work. As I said, it's a big topic, and I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface today. But the good thing is that there are lots of resources out there. If we just wanted to flag up this report, this resource for you, Centre for Sustainable Energy has produced a community energy governance guide, and at the end of the session, we'll give you links to this, but also to some of the other resources out there that I think are most useful. So now we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So for me, at its heart, governance is about how a group's um, makes decisions, who's accountable for those decisions, and how it stays true to its purpose. Some of that's about formal things like your legal structure, your rules, your policies, your board roles, and the meeting processes that you adopt. But it's also about the everyday practice, how decisions are actually made, how responsibilities are shared, and how people work together towards a common goal. And for community energy groups, good governance really matters because we're often asking people to trust us with things that are really important to them. It might be their money, but it might also be their time or their rooftops or their hopes for what community energy can deliver. And so a key challenge is not to add more governance for the sake of it, but to have governance that's appropriate to a group's purpose, its stage, and its current level of responsibility. So next slide, please. So, one way to think about governance and to make it more manageable is to think about its three connected areas. Rules and roles. For me, this relates to the formal structure we work within, our legal form, the rules or articles that we work to, and they might set out things like how our board operates and the rights of our members and how accountability to our stakeholders is built into those rules and roles that we take on. Second area is safeguards. So those are the checks and routines, the things that help us act responsibly as the work gets more complex and as more people get involved. They help us look after money, keep an eye on risk. They also help us manage conflicts of interest, and it's how we keep a record of decisions and meet our reporting duties. For me, those all come under the topic of safeguarding. And finally, it's culture and practice, and that's about what happens in real life. How do people work together? Do we welcome different views? How do new people get involved? And if we make decisions, do they get followed through? And that's a part of governance that often shapes how a group actually feels to be part of. So good governance requires a group to be actively thinking about all of those three. And I'm going to look at these starting with rules and roles. So on to the next slide, please. Why legal structures matter. The first thing to say is that legal structure really matters because our choice of legal form has really practical consequences. It shapes what a community energy group can do in practice. And when you set up a legal entity, that organisation now has an existence of its own, separate from the individuals that are involved. That means that the organisation can own assets, it can sign contracts, employ people, and hold responsibilities in its own name. The type of legal structure that you choose then shapes how your organisation works, including how decisions are made, who controls what kinds of finance you can raise, how any community benefit that you create is protected, and what happens to remaining assets if your organisation is eventually wound up. So your legal form, it's more than just an administrative wrapper. It helps build your purpose, accountability, and commitment to community benefit into the DNA of your organisation itself. Next slide, please. If you're currently considering the best legal form to take, a key principle to bear in mind is that form should follow function. So your structure should be fitting what your group's trying to do. For many groups, a simple unincorporated association might be all that you need, especially if you're just still exploring ideas, if you're meeting informally or doing quite low risk activity. But if your work's starting to get more substantial, you might reach a point where that informal structure doesn't give your group enough clarity or protection for what it wants to do next. And that's where the choice of legal form starts to matter, because different structures bring different rules around control, accountability, community benefit, use of surplus, and access to finance. And as you can see from this diagram, there are many, many different types of legal forms that a community organisation can take. So, say, for example, you want to build a solar park, a community benefit society over here in yellow might be a good fit because it supports democratic member ownership, it allows you to raise community shares, and it also means that your surpluses are focused for community benefit. If, on the other hand, your work's mainly grant funded and you're focusing on fuel poverty advice, it might be that a CIO, a charitable incorporated organisation, is a better fit because it's designed around charitable purpose and delivering public benefit. Alternatively, say your group wants to trade and deliver services and hold contracts, and it wants to make sure that any assets that you own are locked in for community ownership, but you don't think you're going to be raising any investment, then perhaps a kick's worth considering. So the point is that it's not that one form's always better, it's that the structure should match the purpose and activities and what you think you're going to be raising your funding from and building accountability around your need. And the CSE guide that I mentioned has lots of information about the characteristics about each of these different legal forms that are available. Next slide, please. Thanks. When you pick your legal form, with it comes a governing document. If you're a community benefit society, that would be your rules. If you're a KIC or a company limited by guarantee, it's normally articles of association. A charity tends to have a constitution. And even if you're an unincorporated group, you'll probably have some form of constitution or agreed rules about how you work. And these are the documents that you'll pore over for hours at the time that you're setting up. And then they can often get filed away and forgotten about. But they often answer really practical questions. They set out who can be a member, how people are appointed to your governing body, what your governing body can decide, what members decide, how meetings and vote works, even things like the number of people you need at a meeting to be quorum, and how your assets and any financial surpluses can be used. Those are usually set out in your rules. So if a group is unsure about process, the governing document is usually the first place to look for answers. And it's also worth remembering that these documents don't have to be completely fixed forever. Some parts might be locked in or very difficult to change, especially where they're protecting your organisation's purpose or if they involve an asset lock. But in many cases, the rules, if they're not working well for your organisation, there can be a process to change them. One example of this is during COVID, many organisations had to check if their rules allowed for online AGMs. We all moved to webinars and online meetings. Some found they already had enough flexibility in their rules, others needed to update them. And of course, if you want to know how to change your rules, the process for agreeing those changes is normally set out in your rules. So on to next slide, please. And board responsibilities. Those governing documents I've just mentioned normally set out the formal basics. Things like how many people need to sit on the board, particularly if there's a minimum number, whether there needs to be named officer roles such as a chair, a secretary, or treasurer. But as groups develop, we often find that there are other responsibilities beyond those that are the minimum set out in your rules. And it helps to have those responsibilities defined too. So, do you as a group know how your budgets are set and monitored? Whose job is it to keep records of members up to date? Who's got oversight of data and GDPR requirements? So I really recommend, if you don't already have them, creating some simple role descriptions. Even for volunteer-run organisations, this could be really useful. And the process that you'll go through creating them is also an opportunity to clarify if there are potential gaps or if, in fact, they're duplication. You might find two people both think they're responsible for the same thing. So pausing to define your key roles also gives you an opportunity to consider, is there any one or two people who feel like they're carrying too much responsibility? And once you've identified what those roles are, it's also easier to then invite in new people because you can be clear about what you're asking them to take on and what it is that the group needs at any particular point. Alongside the role descriptions, I'd recommend mapping where responsibility sits for key functions and decisions. Um, and also, it might be that some responsibility is held collectively by your whole board, or it might sit with a named individual, or it might sit in a small working group. And this brings me on to decisions and delegations. Next slide, please. So this is the other side of board responsibilities. It's about being clear how decisions actually get made. In community energy, lots of the work that we're doing happens between meetings. So somebody might go off and talk to a building owner or be getting quotes or developing a funding bid. And we need that work to be happening between meetings for projects to progress. But it really helps to be clear about the line between exploring something, I'm going to find out more, and when actually you're going to commit the organisation and its resources to something. And there's a useful framework that I use to think about this called the RACI framework. And it asks for each key decision or thing that you want to do, asking who's responsible, the R of RACI is responsible for doing the work, who's got authority to make or to approve a decision, who needs to be consulted before the decision is made, and who simply needs to be informed. So it's responsible, authority, consultation, and informed. And by way of an example, setting your group's annual budget might be a decision that your full board makes. So the board agrees the overall budget, and you might include contingency and spending limits in that. But once that budget's agreed, different people might be responsible for taking the work forward. One person goes off and gets quotes, somebody else might place the order or approve an invoice. Your treasurer might still need to be consulted before money is spent. They've got to check there's enough cash in the bank and that the spending fits against the agreed budget. And then the board just needs to be kept informed about what's been spent and whether the work's staying in budget. That's an example around money, but the same framework works really well with lots of decisions. The key is being clear about where the board decision ends, where delegated authority begins, and when something needs to come back to the board for approval. It might be that the cost goes above a particular agreed threshold, or the risk has changed, or the decision that you want to make commits the organisation in a new way. And I know loads of this feels very obvious, particularly if you've been involved in an organisation from the start. But something like the process of buying something, if it's post-it notes or solar panels, can be a complete mystery if you're just joined a group, unless it's been written down and shared. So the more you can codify that, and that really helps onboard new people. So it also, that clarity helps people move projects forward because they might be nervous about moving a project forward or making a decision. And it also makes sure that decisions that are about carrying cost or risk or commitment still come back to the right place if there's something else that actually needs to be considered more broadly. Next slide, please. So on to the next area, safeguards. For me, safeguards, those are those practical checks and routines that help a group act responsibly as its work develops. They don't need to be over-engineered, especially if you're an early stage group, but they do need to fit the level of money, risk, and responsibility that your group's carrying. And those safeguards are part of taking your board or your committee responsibility seriously. Depending on your legal form, your directors or committee members may have legal duties that you need to meet. And the first most of these is at making sure that you're acting in the interests of the organization, not yourself. So, can you demonstrate that you're looking after its money and its assets carefully? Are you managing conflicts of interests? And are you not making sure you're not using the role, even inadvertently, for personal advantage? So, for small groups, safeguarding can be quite simple. Do you have a clear record of decisions that you make? Have you got basic financial reporting? Have you got a conflicts register, a simple risk log, and maybe a small number of relevant policies? Um, and these kinds of systems, as well as helping you meet your legal duties, help the organisation run more efficiently. And we'll all have had that experience where you sat in a meeting discussing something that you're absolutely sure has already been discussed, possibly twice, but no one can remember what was actually agreed. And you might not want to formally minute all of your meetings, but having something like a simple actions and outcomes tracker can help keep a note of the decisions, actions that agreed, who's going to carry them out, and by when. And what's brilliant is you can refresh that at the end of a meeting, share it with the people who can attend so that they can also stay up to speed. And then you've got it as a record of what's been agreed, and then that keeps you moving forward. Another useful safeguard is a simple annual governance calendar. So setting out key dates such as when's your financial year end, when's your AGM have to be, do you need to file things with your registration body, so the FCA or Companies House? What are the dates of insurance renewals? When your board elections have to happen? And are there any regular reporting deadlines or policies that need reviewing? And the value of that is that as well as having it all recorded in one place, it means that you begin to share the responsibility for oversight that they're being done, and also builds your organizational resilience because that information isn't just resting with a single individual. And it's all too often that you only become aware of how much sits with one person when that person leaves, and you suddenly go, no one can remember where the insurance documents are filed, or how many months after our financial year end did the AGM have to take place, because that was something that Ruth always worried about. Next slide, please. So culture and practice. Now, for me, finally, rules, safeguards really matter, but they're not the whole story. A group can have the right legal form, the right policies, but it's still going to struggle if decisions are dominated by one or two people, actions aren't followed up, or it's hard for new people to get involved. And culture and practice about how things work in real life. How do meetings feel? Who gets to speak? Do we welcome different views? And do people leave with a really clear sense of what's been agreed? And that's where decision-making style really matters. Some decisions may need a formal vote, especially if that's in your rules and a requirement. But other decisions, it's up to your group to decide how decisions are made. Some groups use consensus, where they will aim to reach full agreement. Others might use consent-based decision making. Consent's a little bit different from consensus. It doesn't mean everyone needs to think the proposal is perfect. It means that there are no serious objections to moving forward. So useful phrase often used is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? Um, but the practical point is to be explicit about the decision-making style being used. What needs to go to a vote? Are we trying to reach consensus or just consent? Has a decision been delegated? Who needs to be consulted? When will the decision be reviewed, and where we will record it? And it matters because people come with different assumptions about the way groups work. And so the more you can be open about your preferred ways of working and reach a shared agreement about how you want your decision making to work for the group is really important. And it really matters for community energy because that affects whether people want to stay involved. It also makes it easier for new people to join in. And also that's critical because ultimately organizations need to keep renewing themselves and their membership and the people actively involved over time. Which brings me on to widening participation, which is my next slide. So Widening participation is often treated as a communications and an engagement issue, but for me, it's also about governance. If a community energy group is rooted locally and it's community led, then it matters who's involved, who's got influence, who gets to benefit, and who's missing from the conversation. Um, One key issue we have as community energy organisations is our reliance on volunteers. We don't often have the resources to pay everyone or indeed anyone for their time, and that can make widening participation a challenge. But if you did have some funding available, we can ask where small changes would perhaps make participation possible. So it might be something really practical, like could we offer to cover childcare costs for somebody who'd love to volunteer attend a meeting but has got childcare commitments? And it might be that the barriers to participation aren't financial. It might be the time commitment expected to attend regular meetings. So can we create other opportunities that for people who are slightly time poorer to get involved? Or it might be that there's just no obvious sign up route. Um, could also be something like the time of day we hold our meetings or where we hold them, or if we're only consulting the people already in the room when we set the time and the venue for the next meeting. And that last point really matters because it's really easy to create cycles that unintentionally lock people out. If we only shape our ways of working around the people who can already attend, we may never get to hear from the people who could contribute but can't access the current format that we've created. Um, there's a great new guide out from CSE on widening participation, which is also going to be included in our resources. Um, One thing that gets talked about a lot is about hard to reach groups. And I'd just challenge us to turn that question around. Sometimes it's not the people that are hard to reach, we're the ones that are hard to reach. As I said, it might be that our meetings are at the wrong time in the wrong place, or we're using language that isn't accessible to everyone. We might be relying on communication channels and networks and mainly reach people who are already connected to us. So, a practical step is to think less about how we bring people into our existing spaces and more about how can we go where people already are? Where do people already gather? Who do they already know and trust? What networks or social spaces or trusted intermediaries already exist? If we think about those routes in, we can then, and I've heard it described as in reach rather than outreach, that can help us think how we can take conversations and activities out into the community rather than expecting people to find their way into the structures and networks that we've created. So widening participation for me, it's not just about promoting the group more widely, it's about looking honestly about those routes to involvement, where the barriers are, what we can do to make it easier for a wider range of people to have a voice and influence and a route into shaping the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. All this said, in reality, most groups already have a lot of the governance building blocks in place. So a useful question is whether other people can see enough of those building blocks to understand how the group works and have confidence in it. So imagine you're a potential funder or partner, and you'll be looking at evidence that the group's approach to you and wants to work with you is real. Is it accountable? Is it capable of acting responsibly? You know, your legal form helps people understand what sort of organization you are. But also seeing things like your website, does it have clear board roles, AGM papers? Do you do your annual returns and filing with your registered body in an up-to-date way? All those things give confidence that your active organization's active and accountable and properly maintained. So as I say, putting those rules and constitutions somewhere accessible, listing your board members and committee roles, keeping your contacts up to date, and explaining that legal form in plain English can all help. Next slide, please. That visible information matters, but confidence is also built through how the group behaves in practice. So, do we respond when people get in touch? Do we follow through on promised activities and actions in a timely way? And these everyday habits really matter because community energy groups are asking people to trust us. So, the more consistently we demonstrate that we're responsive and reliable, the easier it is for funders and partners and members and communities to trust us and support our work and collaborate with us with confidence. So, on to my final slide. I've covered a huge number of governance topics today around roles and responsibilities, safeguarding, and that culture and practice. I've mentioned the community energy, the Centre for Sustainable Energy guidance notes. There's also lots of resources on the Community Energy England website. But also in preparation for this session, we've pulled together 4 digests of different governance related materials that are out there. So we've got a guide that's just a general overview to the more detailed external sources. We've got Getting Going, which is for groups that are still just putting the basics in place. Board effectiveness is the topic that keeps coming up time and again in with community energy go groups. So that's you've already got a board, you've got a steering group, and you want to reflect on what's working, but how you can work more effectively, and also crucially how you can then move on to board recruitments. We've got a separate one just on helping you think how you might tackle board recruitment. All of those can be downloaded from my website, which is makeitcount.org.uk, and there'll be a link circulated as well. So after that whistle stop tour, on to questions.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much, Saskia, for all that. That's yeah, I think yeah, it's probably the governance that really separates community energy from other parts of the kind of commercial energy world. That kind of legal structure, the way we behave, the way we are motivated, it really, yeah, that motto we have of putting people at the heart of the energy transformation is, yeah, governance is really kind of at the core of that, particularly as we, yeah, embody that what it means to be a social enterprise. So we're still a company in a sense in that we're offering services, we're generating and trading power and heat or energy advice, but we're doing it kind of with that social purpose in mind. So yeah,
Mhm.
this kind of yeah, governance really matters when it kind of it's and building up trust in that social enterprise way of working and delivering things. So yeah, thanks for your overview to date. Um, so do we have any questions? Either feel free to add them to the chat or raise your hands, and we can, yeah, you can ask it in person. But if you're feeling a bit shy, you can also type it out and I'll ask it in. So we have a question here from Cara. What are your views on onboarding an organisation like Bright Renewables to support the governance? So there are kind of, yeah, larger umbrella organisations out there in the sector that have some experience of, yeah, these umbrella bodies or other support organisations.
So I presume you mean for things like running your AGM, looking after your share register. Um, if
Yeah.
there, I mean, but my view is that there are a huge range of things that we need to do as community energy organisations. What you choose to outsource will depend partly on what you're interested in retaining. It might be that you've got somebody who's really passionate about running a share register, and then you wouldn't necessarily want to hand that over. So it's partly about what you have capacity and interest in running in-house. Secondly, what you can afford. If you do have funding for a number of people, that kind of the back end service is can be invaluable because it means that you can then focus on your delivery of projects, knowing that you're working with an organization who's providing all those very critical back office functions. What I would say, though, is being very careful that you're really clear about who is responsible for what. And ultimately, um, issues around governance, even if you've delegated them to one of these services, you are still ultimately responsible for making sure that those being carried out correctly. So, and also the range of those services. Some organizations might just take on your share register, others might do everything from your entire member communications and AGM. And so being really clear about what is or isn't being covered by those organizations. John, have you got experience you want to add to that?
Yeah, so some of those bits, yeah, can be a bit daunting and admin heavy. We did run a webinar last year with Ethics, on their kind of share registry platform that comes with their kind of crowdfunding element. So I know that's one way of managing the finances is through those sorts of organizations. Share Energy also have a very good bespoke model for doing that as well, and yeah, are able to take on those roles for some societies where for a small fee, which can be worth it to kind of coordinate that kind of more admin focused back office functions. I'm sure we can share more of those through our Community Energy England how-to guides as well as steer people through the Community Energy Go Associates. Um, so we've got a question there for Catherine.
Uh, it was a thank you in the chat, but just to say, so I guess the question, so I'm at the stage of actually forming as an unincorporated association, hopefully with a pathway to CBS or similar in the future if that's what we need. So this is amazing timing. But around essentially forming that initial committee and core to run this governance, is there any advice in terms of that balance between there are lots of really enthusiastic people in the space, but quite a lot of these roles are very important to get right, and also people's professional backgrounds sometimes will enhance the group. Any advice in terms of recruiting potential committee members or how to strike that balance?
Um, and you're right, it's a balance. It's, knowing what skills and resources you've got in the room. And on that, don't assume that the accountant wants to be a treasurer. They
Just not
may,
doesn't, so yeah.
yeah. Just because somebody has the skills doesn't mean that's how they want to participate in your group. So, one thing I've seen is you can do a skills audit of individuals, and or it doesn't need to be so formal, just sitting around and being really honest about how much time each of you want to give. Also being aware that that might change over time, and were there particular things that really, the accountant actually really wanted to learn how to do rooftop surveys. So can you get out, understand what people want from one side, then start with a list of what are those core skills and tasks that have to be done, that the organization needs. Try and marry those up and then identify what the key gaps are. And it might be as well that it changes over time. I do have a skills audit spreadsheet that we can share if that's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'd add to that in that also there are some sources of pro bono support out there for some roles, perhaps. So there may well be local schemes to you through local community foundations or at the county level. But we also, one of our partners, Unity, have their Community Energy Connect volunteering platform. And that's a really good resource they've got hundreds of kind of professional people with skills from social media to legal to engineering registered on there that want to give their time to community energy projects. So that's a good directory kind of matchmaking place to go and see if there's anyone in your area that is able to kind of complement the skills in your group that's kind of maybe not aware of you yet. But
I think the other thing to consider is those those particular skills or things that need to be done, are they a one-off, or are they an ongoing or a seasonal need? And that might change whether or not you feel that needs to be something that you hold on your central committee, or is it that you need to find somebody who's prepared to support you with a one-off action? Um, so just having a think about what it is that needs to be done, and does it need to sit with you, or is it sometimes if it's one-off, it's actually a really great way for people to test the water of getting involved with you as a group. And I'm the worst for this. I started I got roped into my kids' rugby first aiding because my my son's team didn't have a first aider, and I said I'd investigate training courses. And before I knew it, I was running the entire first aid for the minis and juniors for 3 years. So, it's those little entry points where people get to test and realize that they can do something that's helpful, and before you know it, you're sucked in.
Hmm. Cool. A question here from Steve B. Can you suggest good sources of templates, e.g., for board role descriptions from which we might be able to adapt to meet our particular specifications?
Yeah, yes, Steve. Absolutely. One of the links that are in my resources links to some template roles. Um, and I'm assuming that's Steve Bot. We can definitely follow up on that as well in our Community Energy Go sessions.
Yes, yes, it is me.
Yeah, hi, Steve.
Hi, um, and well done for your mention of your gap analysis spreadsheet.
Uh, Steve has been test running it, so
It for anyone interested in it, I can heartily recommend it. It's a piece of work to do, but it works. Anyway, getting back to my question, yeah, it's really a case of it's I think for so many groups, limited resources, limited time availability, and perhaps, dare I say, limited enthusiasm for governance. Um, and it's much easier to adapt a template that is already drafted and personalize it to your group's efforts and expectations and needs than sort of starting from scratch. And that's kind of where I was coming from with that. But
yeah.
yeah, glad to know
It
that there are templates
definitely
there.
in the I can't remember if it's in board recruitment or getting going, but we've definitely got links to sample job descriptions in there. And I'd say it might be that you need tailored ones for something like your chair, your secretary, and your treasurer, and then you can have a more generic one for being a general director.
Yeah. And you're putting the link in.
Yep, they are all it's four separate sheets and they're all at the bottom of my website, and Faith has put the link in the chat, but we can also circulate it with the slides.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Great. We've got another question in the chat here from Marta. How to recreate a risk register, or what's important to include on a risk register, would you say?
Oh, good question. Depends a little bit on if it's for you as an organization or if it's linked to a particular project. Um, you One of the things that a risk register normally does, it's a list of the things that could go wrong. But it's also important to think about the how likely it is that it's going to go wrong, and then how catastrophic it going wrong is. So it's not just what the thing is, but the likelihood of it happening and the severity if it happens. And that helps give you a combined score, which helps you decide and prioritize which of those risks you really want to then mitigate against. So it's not just the risks, you then also start thinking about, well, if this is a thing that could go wrong, what are the things we could do to reduce that risk from happening? And again, there are quite a lot. I don't think we've got one on our sheet, but there are quite a lot of risk register templates out there. Anything you'd add, John?
Yeah, so yeah, it can be quite specific to do with energy markets or the political environment, but yeah, I found just the common things is yeah, the maintaining that core team is a risk, and especially when you're volunteer at the volunteer level is yeah, maintain people may move away for various reasons. So having that point that Saskia made earlier about having organizations not being too reliant on a single person. So growing yourself to a point where you can sustain yourself if a few people choose to step down for whatever reason is generally a good one. But risk registers do come up quite a lot, especially if you're applying for external funding or looking to work with councils or things like that. It's something, yeah, those sorts of partners may expect to see as part of funding bids or kind of work agreements. So it's worth taking a look at. But yeah, a few.
And and what I would add as well is that your risk register isn't a static thing. I've been on quite major projects where at the beginning of every project meeting we started by reviewing the risk register um, and seeing what had actually changed and had any risks come to pass that we needed to be mindful of. It was with one of the DNOs who are very risk averse, so yeah, it was always number one on the agenda.
Um, It's an interesting question in the chat from Timothy Coombe. Is there an approved way to let people go who no longer fit the organisation? I know this, like the interpersonal relationships running these projects can be an issue sometimes, but I do kind of these kind of constitutions or governance documents handle those sorts of scenarios sometimes.
Um, oh, that's an interesting one. Um, Slightly tangential to that, one thing to think about in your roles is do you have fixed terms? So if the person that is in that you've got in mind, do they have a formal relationship with your organization? So are they on a board, for example? And if so, having those roles which might have within it something like a term so that you might have an expectation that no one stays on forever, that it is naturally expected that there will be turnover and that people actively reapply to stay on for a second term. So building that in up front for everyone. Within your, again, if you've got those roles and responsibilities and as part of your onboarding, you might have created something like some kind of declaration that you expect. These are the standards that we expect people to adhere to, and then you can point to that if things start to get challenging. Same with members. There's normally something in rules about your process about how a member might have their membership withdrawn, and it's normally about sort of whether or not they're providing damage to, if they're damaging the reputation of your organization. But I would, if it's, without, it's not always necessarily that that one individual's being specifically difficult. It just might be that a group aren't coalescing very well. So having a session together, if you don't have those rules, where you talk actively about maybe the way that you expect, what's your preferred form of communication, or what are things that you could collectively do to help your group work more efficiently together, might help. And so collectively creating rules which you can then hold each other up to. And if people are consistently not meeting them, you've then got a discussion point to have and a way to help move those people out. And often sometimes if people are being very disruptive, it might be because actually they don't want to be there anymore. And if you can find a nice way that you can all part company and still be on good terms, that helps everyone. John, have you got more to add on that one? It is a tricky one.
Yeah, not too much. It's the human dynamic again is yeah, like if there's a code of conduct or yeah, certainly if you're starting to employ people, there's contracts and ways of working. But when you're kind of in that earlier phase before HR is a thing, then yeah, it's important to have that kind of democratic accountability to each other and have space to have those difficult conversations if needed. But yeah,
Yeah, and
hopefully,
certainly if you're in an employment situation, then there
mm,
very much are
yeah.
due legal processes that you need to be really mindful of. But can be different when you've got a volunteer, but still, those would still be good templates because ultimately you want everyone to leave and part company on good terms.
Yeah, and it can be if it's volunteers, just find them roles where they're maybe not so public facing if you're concerned about the impression they're giving, or give them jobs to do which are kind of lower impact but still make them feel involved. Perhaps. I think we're running short on time for questions now. Any other one? There's one in the chat from Cara. Again, how do we find and retain treasurers? And are there kind of a minimum? Are there certain roles that have to be kind of filled? Um, I think that was the gist of the question. Are there essential requirement for a community energy board?
So the rules, your rules will say if there's very specific roles that you have to fulfill. Um, but then it's thinking about what are those skills and tasks that you need. Certainly having somebody with an oversight of the finances, I'd say is pretty critical, but it depends on your group and how you structure things as to whether that person's got oversight or are you expecting them to also do the bookkeeping, Are they the people who need real detailed knowledge, or is it that you're buying in services of an accountant once a year to do that? And so exactly what role what your board needs itself might differ depending on the other layers of support that you've got. Finding treasurers, that is a challenge. I would look at the Unity um, resource that John mentioned. If anyone else has got any suggestions about how to find treasurers, do please share them.
Yeah, and I think it's good practice as well when you're handling money to have like multiple signatories on bank accounts. So even though one person may be the treasurer, they still, yeah, you have other people in the organization that need to sign off on certain levels of spending, perhaps. I'll just say on the finances as well, having been on the kind of funders side of the fence with this, that kind of where your organization is publicly registering kind of financial information, whether that's on Companies House or the Mutuals Register, that like partners will look that up to kind of look for the consistency of filing and check there aren't any warning signs in terms of you being given notices for late submissions or so it is worth kind of putting some effort in to keep that side of your kind of governance, the publicly visible parts up to date and on time, because it shows you that you're a partner to be trusted then. So yeah, people do check things like that when you're applying for funding. And yeah, check for public account filings, things like that. Okay. One final question then from Klaus. Thank you for joining us, Klaus, from Romania, I think it was, in the chat. In your experience, what is the best first step for a very early stage community energy initiative, formal legal structuring, community engagement, or technical feasibility? How would you sequence these elements?
I would put your formal legal structuring last on the basis that your form needs to follow function. And so until you know you've got a project and a community behind you, don't focus too much on nailing down your legal form. That comes in at the point that you're about to employ someone or want to apply for a grant or getting more formal. I would say the community engagement and the technical feasibility should go hand in hand. And in fact, they helping find those projects that need to be technically feasible in some part is going to be dependent on that community engagement, which might help you find those opportunities.
Great, thank you, Saskia. Running short of time now, so I think we're going to have to head to the thank yous and the wrapping up part of our program. So, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our brilliant speaker, Saskia. Yeah, thumbs up, round of applause, things like that, with the emojis.
And thank
Our
you for all your
next,
questions.
yeah, cool. Well, hey, there we go. I found them. Our next webinar via Community Energy Go will be an introduction to community energy, led by Sonia Bedford and Saskia again. Hey. This will mainly be useful for groups that are not yet very familiar with community energy, but you are all welcome to come along if you're interested. I think that's going to be happening during Community Energy Fortnight, hopefully. We are supporting a range of different community groups through Community Energy Go, from sports clubs to faith organisations, many of whom don't yet have a strong understanding of community energy. So that'll be a really good kind of introduction to what we're all trying to achieve together here. We'll email the sign up link for the next webinar after this, along with the slides and recording for this session. If you haven't already, please register your interest for support through Community Energy. Go and read more about it on the website. And then finally, please complete our feedback survey, which will be popping up on your screen soon. It's really valuable to kind of, yeah, get continued support for these sorts of programs through your feedback. We'll leave the session running for a couple of minutes for you to fill out that form, and thank you very much. I'll give you the 5-minute warning when we're looking to close the session. But yeah, thank you for all your time today.